Hello Bookish friends, welcome to my January wrap-up part 2. In this video I will talk about the 6 books that I finished in the second half of January and 1 book that I DNF'd. Starting from this month, I will do a separate video about my Bookish statistics and the wrap-up of readathons and reading challenges that I'm participating. It will be the next video following this one. So let's see what I thought about the books at the time that I finished them. Today is the 16th of January and I finished the audiobook that I was listening for a week. I finished Kuyucaklı Yusuf by Sabahattin Ali. Sabahattin Ali is one of the most beloved authors in our country. And Kuyucaklı Yusuf was the first novel that he wrote. I additionally read this book for the print of a book by an author that I have not read for a while. I have read Madonna in a Fur Coat, Kürk Mantolu Madonna by Sabahattin Ali about 3 years ago and I really enjoyed it. In this book, Yusuf is an orphaned boy whose family has been murdered. He is adopted by the mayor of the province his family lived in and he grows up to be sort of like a son to the mayor. The book takes place in the last years of the Ottoman Empire. Aside from Yusuf's love story with the mayor's daughter, an ongoing background story about the modernization of Turkey and the emerging war is felt all through the book. I like Kuyucaklı Yusuf, but I have to say I did not love it, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. It was very obvious that this book was the first novel of Sabahattin Ali because although his writing was still beautiful, it was not as glorious as his later books. Also, I have to say the plot felt a bit didactic for my taste. I'm glad I read this novel because it is one of the most significant works in the early years of the new Turkish Republic. Today is the 19th of January and I finished my body read of Mehmet My Hawk by Yaşar Kemal, one of the most prolific authors of Turkish literature, with Ros Scallydandling about the books. Although I will record a very detailed Turkish shelf video about this classic, of course I will talk briefly about this book in my wrap-up as well. In this book we are following the life of İnce Mehmet, who rebels in his village, who is like the feudal lords of medieval Europe. The story takes place in 1940s and we follow İnce Mehmet from his childhood till the time when he becomes a sort of like an outlaw folk hero who gives hope to the people who are oppressed by this feudal regime. This book was actually recommended by my father and he said to me one day, if you have not read a Yaşar Kemal book, you cannot say anything about Turkish literature. And when I was reading the book, I thought my father was so right. Although I really did like the plot and supported Mehmet with all my heart, the shining star of the book was the writing style of Yaşar Kemal. I had doubts that maybe it would not be translated so well into English because it really plays with the rhythm of the writing, but of course it is in Turkish. But when I talked to Ros about the translation, she said very similar things to me, how beautiful the writing style of Kemal was. Aside from the writing style, this epic and heroic plot was told so realistically in details. I think it made Mehmet much more relatable character than a perfect hero with no faults. This book has a very strong message against feudalism, inequality in wages and also in land distribution. And a very subtle criticism of the society in Turkey is also present in this book. I did not feel like I was tutored about all of these evil things. Instead, I read a very engaging story with a very relatable character, as well as understanding the message perfectly clearly. The body reading experience was incredibly good, and Ros also liked the book very, very much. And with our discussion, we noticed some details that the other one maybe didn't think of. It was also great to talk about Turkish people with a reader who has a very different point of view than mine. So I gave Mehmet My Hawk 10 out of 10. And the body reading experience, another 10 out of 10. I'm really glad that I read my first perfect book in 2022, and it was written by a Turkish author. Today is the 22nd of January, and I want to talk about a book that I DNF'd yesterday. And also a book that I finished today. The book that I DNF'd is the book that we are reading for the book club for next month. Because I was not listening to any audiobook, and this book was on my audiobook application, I decided to start it early. The book is called The Ghostwriter by Philip Roth. As I was listening to the book, I realized that I did not care about the characters at all. And the plot was sort of uninteresting. It is about a young writer who's visiting a very famous writer. And then the anecdotes from their lives are given throughout the book. I did not have any problems with the writing style. I DNF'd the book at 30% because I did not want to listen to a book about characters that I could care less about. For the author Philip Roth, I can read other books from him with a plot that actually interests me. So I have not given up on the author. The book that I finished today is the first book that I'm reading for Books of Alfred Hitchcock project. In this project, I'm reading books adapted into big screen with movies directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Most of the adaptations of these books were done with the supervision of Alfred Hitchcock, and it is known that Alfred Hitchcock chose the books himself. First book on the list, which was The Pleasure Garden by Oliver Sandys. Oliver Sandys was a female author who wrote in many different pseudonyms. I will talk more about the Alfred Hitchcock connection and the comparison of the book with the movie in a separate video, in which I evaluate as I finish 3 books. This book, we are following the lives of 2 friends who are very different from each other. One of them is Gaynor, who's a chorus girl with limited talents and a classical beauty. She has a very kind heart and a very strong maternal instincts, and she looks after animals that looks helpless, and that's how she befriends Lori, who looks very innocent and lost in an audition. Lori has an innocent beauty that appeals to male audiences. She can dance quite beautifully. She gets the bigger part in the audition because she has a passion for materialistic things, especially jewels. She goes through a very different path than Gaynor. Follow the lives of these 2 young women all throughout the book. This book made the history for me in Goodreads. As of right now, I am the only person who rated this book on Goodreads. And I rated the book 8 out of 10. I was very, very pleasantly surprised by this book. Although it has some outdated themes, such as racism, which was actually a fact in 1920s Europe, and a bit idealized version of a woman who prefers traditional roles. On the other hand, especially the character of Lori was very complex, even though she was very selfish and had motives which were very unlikable. Because we follow the story from her point of view, we can understand some of the things that she is going through, and she goes through feelings of remorse and regret sometimes, though it does not last. We actually cannot feel hatred for this woman. Such a character would be evil in many of the books written in those times, so it was very different in that sense. Although Gainer's more traditional values were clearly praised and approved all throughout the book, it was also clear she was not a very clever woman, although she had a heart of gold. Those complexities in the characters were true for almost all of the side characters too. In summary, it was a book that I very much enjoyed reading, and I gave The Pleasure Garden by Oliver Sandys an 8 out of 10. Today is the 26th of January and I finished Sevda Sokağı, Komedyası by Halide, Edip, Adıvar. Halide, Edip, Adıvar is an author that I've read when I was a teenager a lot. And I have not heard of this book before. When I saw it in the library, it was a short book and I wanted to give it a try. This book takes place in the beginning of the 20th century, the first 20 years in Istanbul. We are told allow triangle, more accurately allow quartet, through the points of view of three main characters. An adopted girl who works as a maid in Pasha's mansion falls in love with a shoemaker, and that shoemaker in turn loves a young nurse, and that young nurse is in love with the married doctor that she assists. And many things happen in this very short little book. I read this book in just one day. It was a slow day at work, but it was so easy to read, and also I have to say fun to read. But the writing was mediocre. The characters were quite two-dimensional. Although I enjoyed reading this book quite much, it was actually a 6 out of 10 book for me. It is the 27th of January and I just finished the audiobook that I was listening. Keşke, Unutsam by Bihter, Dinçel. This Turkish novel was written by quite a famous actress who played one of the most endearing characters in a TV series that I watched many years ago. In this book, two people who have lost their memories do become friends during their stay at the hospital. While they try to remember their pasts, they sort of play a game in which they create new identities for them, and through their new identities we are told some stories about the recent history of Turkey. The whole book is told through the point of view of a raven. I really did like the structure of the book. The voice of the author, it had quite a humorous tone. And as I listened more and more, I really wanted to find out what happened to those people and what they lived in their past. On the other hand, although the game of creating new identities seemed very interesting at first, the stories they created were trying too hard to give a message about the political view of the author. I 100% agree with the political view of the author. On the other hand, I never like to be preached about an ideology, regardless of I agree with it or not. As I've said before, as they get more and more close to learning their truth, their story became very interesting for me. So in summary, I gave this book a 7 out of 10. Today is the 30th of January and I finished Scarlet by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book in the young adult science fiction series, The Lunar Chronicles. The story takes on from where we left off at the end of the first book. We follow Cinder and a new character, Captain Thorn, as they go through adventures. And the more significant storyline in this book is, of course, the storyline that follows Scarlet. It goes through a very different retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. She goes through this journey with a very complex character called Wolf. In order not to give spoilers, I cannot give any details about the plot. As for my review, I really did like the world building in this book. I very much admire how Marissa Meyer can tell a story which follows the main plot points of the fairy tale, but makes it so different that we really want to know what will happen to those characters. And additionally, in the first book, I really did admire the character of Cinder. But I thought the male character, Kai, was just a meh character. But this time, the male characters who are introduced in this book, Thorn and Wolf, are such complex characters, and they are very intriguing to read about. Scarlet is also a very brave character, like Cinder, which makes her very likable. My favorite character was, I have to admit, Thorn. He was a very interesting character with a sense of humor that I really did like. I kept picturing a young Chris Pratt while I was reading about him. This of course meant that I really would like to see a TV series adaptation of this series, because this book has many details that would shine in a visual TV series adaptation. To sum it up, I gave the second book in the series an 8 out of 10 again, and I'm actually very glad that I will read the third book, Cress, in the series, since I picked up Lunar Chronicles again for my series cup in my February TBR video. So this was my wrap up of the books that I finished in the second half of January. I think I had a pretty good reading month in January. Please comment down below. How did your reading month go? And did you start the new year with a new favorite like I did? And if you're a new viewer, first of all, welcome. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you very soon. Bye. As for Turkish word of the day, I'm going to choose pleasure. Pleasure means zevk in Turkish, and zevk is our Turkish word of the day. Have a good day.